So in a previous chapter, we had divided matter into pure substances and mixtures, and then our pure substances got divided into elements and compounds. So we're continuing that little tree, and we're dividing our elements into atomic and molecular, and our compounds into molecular and ionic. So first we're going to look at elements. We can divide them into atomic elements, which the definition is that they exist as a single atom. So if we look at the name atomic elements, they're existing as individual atoms. The other type, molecular elements, exist as molecules, which means that we have to have two or more of those atoms bonded together. Now the difference between this and a molecular compound is that our molecular compounds have to have two or more different types of elements. Now there are a few that follow this rule, molecular elements, and the way that we remember them is the rule of sevens. So there's 7 of them. They form a 7 on the periodic table. It starts at number 7 and then it goes down column number 7. Of course, hydrogen's a little bit of an exception to that, but these 7 elements all exist as diatomics, meaning that they come in pairs of 2. So O2, F2, Cl2. Whenever they're alone in nature, they exist as a diatomic. Now down here there's ones that are listed that exist as polyatomic, so poly means many. Phosphorus is generally P4, sulfur is S8, selenium is Se8. You do not need to memorize these ones. You do need to know these ones. They will come up in multiple chapters. Under the compound side, we're looking at the molecular compounds first. We need to have 2 or more nonmetals. Now these nonmetals are bonded together with covalent bonds. Remember, that means that they're sharing their electrons. And the smallest unit that we can have is a molecule. So our example here is butane, and so we have individual butane molecules. And then the other type of compound is an ionic compound, and this is made up of a cation and an anion, or a positive charge and a negative charge. So it's generally a metal with a nonmetal, but it could also contain a polyatomic ion. A polyatomic ion is when we have multiple atoms, usually nonmetals, that are bonded together and share a charge. So this phosphite, PO3 3-, would act as our anion, and then it would be combined with a cation that has the positive charge. When we have an ionic compound, it looks like this. So all of the atoms are arranged so that each cation is completely surrounded by anions, and each anion is surrounded by cations, and it doesn't have individual molecules. So we say that the smallest thing that we can have is called a formula unit, which is really just whatever the lowest ratio is. But when it exists in nature, it's going to exist in a whole bunch of different amounts, but its overall lowest ratio will be consistent. So identify the elements that have, I'm missing a word there. Identify the elements that have molecules as their basic units. So really what this question is asking is, which of these elements exist as a diatomic? So we look back at our notes, we look at the periodic table. Hydrogen is a diatomic, iodine fits into that category, and oxygen fits into that category. Lead does not. Most of the metals are going to exist as atomic elements. So hydrogen, iodine, and oxygen all fit into that rule of sevens, those rule of diatomics. Classify each compound as ionic or molecular. So the easiest way to do this is to look at the element that starts the formula. So if it starts with a nonmetal, carbon is a nonmetal, that means it's molecular. This one also starts with carbon, so it's also molecular. This one, we have platinum and oxygen. Platinum's a metal, so that means that this one's going to be ionic. And then our last one, sulfur. Sulfur is also a nonmetal, so it's molecular. Because ionic compounds need to have a metal with a nonmetal, the metal is always listed first. whereas molecular compounds are just 2 or more nonmetals. So if we look at that starting element, that's going to tell us what type of compound we have. And then our last question, based on the molecular views, classify each substance as an atomic element, a molecular element, an ionic compound, or a molecular compound. So this first one looks like that ionic compound we were just talking about. The purple and green atoms are alternating, which tell us that it is an ionic compound. In B, we only have one type of atom, the green one, and they're bonded together in pairs. So that tells me that it's a diatomic, which means that this is going to be a molecular element. And then the last one down here, we have these little individual atoms, and if we think back to our Appendix 2A that had our color coding, we know that this is carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. These are all nonmetals. So it's existing as molecules, and it has all nonmetals. So that tells us that tells me that it's a molecule. All right, that is it for this section. Thank you.